sceptical more than cynical. I think there probably are some occupations or workers that they are, you know, they don't touch quite so much. Nurses sprang to mind when you asked that question. I thought, well, actually, nurses often, you know, that is the line in the sand. Quite often, the media doesn't give them such a hard time, but maybe we are. I mean, journalists are, you know, it's their job to ask questions. As I was saying, it's their job to look beyond the obvious answers. In terms of the politics of envy, I mean, I agree in what I was saying earlier about we have managed to get ourselves into a situation where one set of workers is being pitted against the other between private and public sector workers, and I think that's a terrible tragedy, if you like, where we are at the moment. I think one of the things that trade unions need to do more of is to root themselves and root their campaigns more in local communities, and I think that's a way of overriding that. And I think people are it is beginning to hit home with ordinary people who might think, well, they work for the public sector, they've got fantastic pensions, gold-plated pensions, they've got all these terms and conditions, why should they? I don't. I think when you ask a lot of people in surveys, do they agree with the cuts? And they might say yes. If you then ask them, well, do you agree that your local hospital should see its services cut? Do you agree? And we're hearing today about sports in schools. You know, if you're talking to parents with young kids, if you say to them, do you think that, you know, your child's after-school sports club should be hived off, they'll be outraged at the prospect. When the penny is dropping and they're realising how it's going to affect them on a day-to-day basis, how it's actually going to impinge on their lives and their families' life and well-being, I think people are beginning to slowly see that actually this is an enormous experience that we're all going through collectively, and actually they're not going to come out of it untouched. It's not happening to someone else, it's not happening to other people's families who've got all these, you know, with money in the bank and great terms and conditions and lovely pensions to look forward to. It's actually going to be affecting them, and I think it's a huge opportunity now for trade unions to harness those emotions, those feelings, that indignation and outrage, and try and be working with people who aren't necessarily engaged with the movement at the moment in a way that will actually make a difference on the ground, you know, and you can do that, I think, by working with a broader kind of coalition of groups within communities and trying to reach people in different ways, in more imaginative ways. Because I think that is one of the problems when these things are dealt with, when people are reading about them and it's just about an overarching policy or a decision, a political decision that's being reported in newspapers, when actually, we were saying earlier about, actually it's about human stories and it's about how it affects people, people's lives and emotions, and they're the stories I think that are absent more from the mainstream media at the moment, and they're the stories that people need to be listening and watching and reading about. TUC, well, obviously the TUC can always do more. I mean, but the TUC is a collective. It does represent a pretty diverse movement. So I don't think it can all. You know, it's not just the TUC's fault. There's lots of different agendas and a lot of different individuals and organisations at play there. But yeah, I would like to see the TUC leading the debate more, and when we do have representations of the movement collectively, that it's one that has some fire in its belly.
Mobilise, as you say, all the people that are grassroots level, and I think particularly that actually is, there are a lot of women in this room, but it's one of the things I've written about a lot in my work, because my own experience growing up, I grew up with my mum and my sisters and my aunties, and a lot of very strong women around me, and also speaking to a lady recently, a documentary maker who's been dealing with politics in Israel and on the left bank, with a lot of the change that happened, because a lot of women are now starting to get involved, and they just bring a different dynamic, and they don't necessarily bring that kind of head-banging, let's all have a scrap. It brings something more imaginative than that, and so I would say that again is something that could really be, and I don't mean to be sort of sexist when I say that, but I do think there is something to be said there and to be exploited. So anyway, for me, I just think it's now about being really clever and letting people, surprising people about what unions offer, surprise them and make them exciting again.
Even in spite of that, when it comes to it, a really good story still wins out. So that if the government really does something terrible, actually even they will say, hang on, look, here are some people really suffering. So I think even the Daily Mail will follow up on some of the stories of the amount of suffering that is really going to be caused over the next year. So there's plenty of opportunity to use even our very unfair press. Trade unions and values, I mean, that's a very good question, because as you were saying, so much of what people know is Bob Crow, the arch pantomime villain. You'd want to play King Rat in every pantomime that was over Christmas. And very little about the real values, and that's partly again trade unions' fault. They have invested very little in the things that are most difficult and are going back to its origins and its roots, saying, right, actually, not in the hotels, not in the Rovers, not in the meetings, we will spend much more money on recruiting outside McDonald's, outside care homes, at change of shift. We will go back to our origins and recruit in all of those industries that are not unionised at all. The truth is that trade unions now are driven back to almost exclusively the public sector, or what used to be the public sector. It is only strong in places which used to be nationalised industries. There is virtually no trade unionism at all in the private sector, except for those categories. And so when the government attacks the public sector, it is attacking trade unions too, because it's almost perfect synergy. So it's very convenient for them to say trade unions are fat cats, they've got gold-plated pensions, they've got feather-bedded this and that, about public sector workers. And that's why public sector workers have to be so clever in the way they
In relation to Ed Miliband's election, I remember coming out of the hall and I backed David Miliband, but I'm a Democrat. I believe in the vote, and you don't fight a guy according to a set of rules that you invent after the event. You fight according to the set of rules as they are. And the journalist said to me, but this is trade unions who've elected for them, as if it was trade union barons who'd laid down, right, there's 500,000 votes for Ed Miliband, whereas it was people. You just had to remind me that these are nurses and teachers and whoever else that's taken part in the process and has joined up. It's really depressing that such a small percentage, as Polly said earlier, chose to take part in that. I think there are two really successful bodies that the trade union movement should learn from. One is anybody who sits in a boardroom, and in particular on the remuneration committee of a public company, because they are the best union in the world. They make sure that everybody else on the remuneration committee is extremely well remunerated, and they make sure that nobody else knows about it until it's far too late for anybody else to do anything about it. Which is why you've seen boardroom pay grow exponentially. Even in the last couple of years, it's gone up dramatically. And the other, which is something I have more respect for, is I think that the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community over the last 15 years has run an extremely effective union-like collective strength campaign, which has secured more positive changes for those involved than I think any other organisation that I can think of in the last 30 years, and has managed to make it impossible for, I hope, a Conservative government to unpick those reforms. So I wonder whether there are things that we could learn from that, and it's not just putting Gandalf in charge of the campaign.